Hey folks, Chuck Black here, 52 weeks of Python. I thought that it might be helpful for me to record myself showing you how I built this quokka project from scratch, from very start to finish. So in order to do that, I'm going to be recording myself starting with nothing, creating an Ubuntu system, a virtual machine, installing Pycharm and all of the libraries and all the software that's required to build quokka, and then actually building the application itself. I'm going to record myself doing this without audio, and then I'm going to speed it up so that all the boring stuff like downloading the Ubuntu ISO and things of that nature don't take quite so long, and I will do voiceover narration explaining what exactly I'm doing. At least that's my plan. Hopefully it will work out, but I just thought I would let you know what I plan to do in this particular series. So without further ado, here it is. Okay, so starting from the very beginning, what you're going to want to do is download Virtualbox or VMware if you prefer that. Here I'm downloading Virtualbox for Windows. You can see it's getting downloaded. And once it is completed, what I will be able to do is run the installation process. You can see here in my downloads folder, it has in fact gotten downloaded. What I would do in order to install it would be to do open, and the application will then run, and it will take you through this process. Now I already have it installed, so I'm not going to actually do that. So I'm going to cancel out of it right here. But you can see in my Virtualbox that sure enough, there it is. And this is what we'll be using to load Ubuntu. Okay, the next thing to do is going to be to download and create a VM for Ubuntu. So you look for Ubuntu download, you find the right link, you click on it. It will take a very long time to install. I'll save you the pain of waiting this entire time by speeding it up significantly. So now we've downloaded the Ubuntu image, the ISO file. There it is in the downloads folder. What we're going to do is we're going to begin creating a new VM in Virtualbox. So I'm going to give it a name here. You can call it whatever you want. If it has the name Ubuntu in it, then the following two things, this one here and the one below, you do not have to specify because it's smart enough to know that it's Linux and Ubuntu. But because I didn't have Ubuntu in the name, I had to specify that. Now you'll give it how much RAM you want to have for your VM. I'm giving it roughly 6 gigabytes of RAM. You can select the default for most of these things. You might want to give it a little bit extra hard drive space just so that you don't run out. It can be a pain to enlarge that later on. And now it's ready to be created. Now it hasn't actually been created yet because what we need to do is we need to effectively install the ISO file into the DVD player. And so I'm referencing that here. And once I do that, I will be able to actually start the VM and it will load it from that ISO file. So I'm going to say start. It's going to ask me a question and I'm going to say okay. And then it is going to begin the actual process of reading in that ISO image and creating our Ubuntu. Now there's a few things that we will be modifying or that it will be asking us for information. So we're going to go through that. And then the actual install takes quite a while. And so that part I will speed up significantly. This part though, once Ubuntu begins to go, you can see it sped up a little bit. I don't actually type as fast as you're about to see me typing. It's going to pop up and give me an opportunity to answer some questions. I want to install Ubuntu. I'm not just doing a temporary thing. I'm taking the language. Everything else I'm saying is okay for the default here. It can download upgrades. And now I'm telling it to install. It's warning me that it's going to erase the disk. That's okay. It's erasing the actual virtual disk that I've created. Here I'm giving my name and a password. And from this point forward, it's going to start to run and to install everything. And I'm going to speed this up for you. Okay, so at this point it's done installing. We're going to restart it like it recommends, and we will begin to get things set up so that it's a little bit more usable. I'm logging in here. Once I've logged in, what I'm going to do is, as you can see, it's only using a small part of the screen. So what I want to do is I want to install guest additions. You saw that down at the bottom pop up pretty quick. I'm going to attempt to run it, and it's going to ask me for my password. The guest additions is going to allow things to run expanded so that it will expand the screen size to use your entire screen instead of just the small part that we can see. Here it says the system is not set up to build kernel modules. I need to install GCC make and Perl. And so what I'm going to do, see I'm highlighting what it is that I need to do. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a terminal window and I'm going to install those particular items. So the way that you can bring up a terminal window, at least at the beginning here, is you select it from the application thing down at the bottom left. Here I'm saying sudo apt-get install GCC make and Perl. You'll learn more about installing stuff a little bit later. We'll do more things, but you can see it's installing these components. Now, Ubuntu 20 is the first time I've had to install these by hand, so I don't know if they forgot to install them or if that's intentional and they left them out. But anyway, these are going to end up getting installed. Once they are installed, then I can rerun the guest additions script, and it will actually allow me to utilize the entire screen. And so what I'm going to do in order to go after that, there's my disk that is mounted. You can see there's autorun.sh. So what I want to do is I'm going to change directory to media / the name of where it is. Always going to be the same, except your name will be different than my name there. And I'm just going to run it. And it's going to run and install all of these guest additions that will allow Virtualbox to have Ubuntu make use of your entire screen. So if you're like me and you have an HD screen, you would like to be able to make use of that for software development. In fact, in my situation, I have two screens. I have my laptop screen on one side and I have an external monitor on the other side, and I keep my virtual machine running in my extra monitor, and I have things like my mail or any other type collaboration tools like Slack or whatever running on my laptop screen. So now we've successfully installed this. I'm just getting rid of these things, telling it not to install anything. Now I need to restart everything in order for Ubuntu to make use of this. And if we've done it correctly, once Ubuntu has loaded, you will see that it is making use of the entire screen real estate. And for software development, I probably can't emphasize enough, it's really important and very nice to be able to make use of that entire screen area. Of course, I log in first. That's going to be on the small screen. Once I've logged in, you will be able to see, lo and behold, hopefully the entire screen shows up and we have all of the Ubuntu ready. Okay, in this next little part, I'm just going to be customizing Ubuntu for my own preferences. You can see I'm getting rid of a number of things from the launcher that I don't really care about, that I don't really use. Next, I'm going to go to the settings and select a background that I like. And once I have done that, then I will go and change the size of the launcher over there on the left to be much smaller, skinnier. And then the last thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up a terminal window so that I can set my preferences for terminal windows. Once I've added it to my favorites, the preferences, for me, I like it to have about 120 characters wide. So I'm going to set that, and then you'll see when I open a terminal window again, it will be at that appropriate size. Okay, so now we're getting down to development. We're getting to the point where we're going to be installing things that we're using to write our software. First, you can see we're installing Python 3 pip. Pip is the package installer for Python. It allows us to download all of the open source and free software that we use, like Flask, like SQL Alchemy, and many, many others. So this takes a while as it pulls down everything that it needs. For pip 3, once this is done, a little bit later on, you'll see us installing a lot of packages using pip 3. Before we do that, though, we're going to install a couple of things. One is Node.js that you see there. This is what is actually the engine that will be running our user interface. So we will be writing a little bit of JavaScript software. We'll be using Node.js, and we're using NPM, which is a package installer for the Node.js environment. So that's where we're going to get all the nice looking React framework stuff that gives us our tables and allows us to put up graphs and use application bars, menu bars, buttons, and the like. So this takes a little bit while to install, but it is something not for Python, but for our JavaScript code. Now, the last thing we're going to look at here is Git. Git is what I'm using and that you probably will use if you get into software development. It's where you will store all the versions of your source code and branch and do things of that nature. Okay, this next section is me installing Google Chrome. It can be a little bit finicky on Ubuntu 20 at the moment. So what I had to do is I had to do a wget to pull down the package. And after I have the package pulled down completely, then I'm able to do a sudo apt-get install of Google Chrome and get it completely installed. It may be easier for you. You may not even want to use Chrome, but this is what I ended up having to go through. Okay, here's where I do pip 3 in order to install a bunch of things. I'll try to call them out as I do them. First is Flask. Now I'm installing Flask SQL Alchemy. The next one that I'm doing is NetTools, providing some networking functionality that's useful. I'm trying to install SQLite, but it's already on the system, so I don't need to do that. Here I do Tabulate. Here I'm doing Python ARP table, gives me ARP information. Here I'm doing Flask cores, allowing me to run on multiple systems. I'm installing Napalm, which pulls in a bunch of other things, including NetMiko and things of that nature, so this one takes a little bit longer. NTPlib allows me to run NTP services. This one, PSYCOPG2 binary, is for Postgres, the database I'm using. Now I'm actually using Snap to install Pycharm Community. This allows me to do all of the nice things that you get from an IDE, and this installation actually takes a little bit of time. Maybe I'll speed this up for you. Actually, going back, I realized that it's just about going to be done soon, so I don't have to actually speed this up for you. The next thing that we're going to install is Webstorm, which is what I use in order to do my JavaScript development. I found that it's moderately helpful. You could do the development within Pycharm, which is free. Webstorm did cost me money. I'm not sure that it's worth doing that, so you might want to just use an editor or Pycharm for that. The next thing I'm doing is I'm making Google Chrome my default browser, and I am adding it to the launcher so that I'm able to run it. And here you can see Pycharm. I'm starting it. Once it gets started, I will be able to add it to the launcher on the left. And in the next segment, we'll look at creating our first simple application. Okay, here we are out at Virtualbox. We're going to look and make sure that we're using as many processors as we can, which is good. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to change networking to be a bridged adapter. That is going to be helpful for when we do host-based discovery. If you don't care about hosts, you can use NAT, but this is what I'm doing in this application, so that's how I have set it. So right now Ubuntu is going to start, and I'm going to be able to begin building my first actual Flask application that will provide a REST-based API to our quokka code, the very beginnings of our quokka code. So here we are in Ubuntu, and the next thing that is going to happen is I'm going to start Google Chrome so that I can have this page that talks about how to build large applications in Flask, and it gives me the structure of how everything needs to be set up in order for it to work. This is all cookie cutter stuff. You don't have to understand the details of this. This is just a pattern that we will be following. So I'm going to create a new project first. So I'm going to change the name of it from Untitled to Quokka, and then I need to tell Pycharm what my Python interpreter is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out which one is the one that's installed on my system, which Python 3. It points me to one. There's actually Python 3, Python 3.8 are both going to work. So when I come in here, I'm going to click on the little dots, and I'm going to go to the location that was specified. User bin Python takes a little while to load to get down to where it is, but I want to be able to just specify this. So I'm finding Python in the list here, Python 3, and specifying OK. I'm going to click OK here, and I'm actually running Python 3.8, and I'm going to create my project. Now, it's going to give me a default project, which is not going to actually have anything in it. I'm going to get rid of all of those tips. I'm going to get ready to build the things that I need in order to mimic what this Flask application structure is going to be. So you can see that the actual directory structure, this is all that I really need. Of my application, that would be Quokka. I'm going to create a package underneath Quokka called Quokka. This is just how Flask does things. And then within that, there's going to be this file called init.py __ init __. You're going to see that happen a lot, so we'll be seeing that. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put our application code into that init file. And here I went to another page, which is a minimal Flask application. And just like it says, I'm just going to copy and paste that into my init file. So that's all we're doing. We haven't written any code of our own yet. We're just putting it into this init file. Now the next thing is another cookie cutter thing. There's this file called setup.py that we need to create. And so I'm going to create that. You need to make sure you do it at the right point in the directory. And I'm just going to copy this boilerplate stuff down. This is the only type boilerplate stuff that we're going to be doing in order to create a Flask application. Now I'm going to actually start it by following these instructions. I'm going to say export Flask app equals, and the name of my application is Quokka. So I'm going to type that in. Once I have done that, then the next thing that I need to do is just run Flask. So I can just say Flask run, and you can see from the output that it's running on localhost port 5000. So I'm going to open up another browser window, type in localhost 5000, and it should be talking to Flask. And sure enough, that hello world is the same thing that was in my init file for handling the route at the base route into my code. So I'm just so you can believe me that I'm doing it, I'm changing hello world to hello Chuck. I need to restart Flask, of course, when I do that. Sometimes you will need to do it, sometimes you won't, but most of the time you will. There you can see that it actually comes up and says hello Chuck. So we have our basic Flask application. All we've done is we followed the pattern that they provided in that website. that includes something that looks like this, my init file, and there we have it, our first Flask application. So now we've got the foundation of our Flask application, our quokka application, set up and ready to roll. All I need to do from this point forward is begin to modify the code in here in order to implement the things that we want, such as discovering hosts, monitoring our networking devices, monitoring services, figuring out response times, saving things to a database, etc. So in the next little session, I will be showing you how we can return stuff that actually makes a little bit more sense for us. So instead of hello Chuck, we'll be responding a device, and maybe we'll be adding also reading in a device file that's in YAML or JSON and then returning that information. So we're pretty close to having something that's a little bit meaningful in terms of having a Flask application that does something intelligent for our network. And yeah, so that's creating an initial application. My system is set up with the right software and we're ready to roll.